Celebrating and showcasing some of the most amazing people around the world who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place. This is CUTV News. I'm Jim Masters. Today we spotlight an extraordinary person, an extraordinary doctor who is not only known for his expertise in the medical field, but who is also a source of inspiration, resilience, perseverance, and strength. Dr. James Abshire is a first-rate internal medicine doctor, practicing at Mercy Medical Group for some 25 years in Sacramento, California. He's also the author of the thought-provoking book, Live, Love, and Let Go, a doctor's insightful approach to living and dying. Dr. Abshire says he wrote this book because throughout his medical career, he was seeing patients struggle with life and death situations. So he wanted to help people comprehend and ultimately embrace dealing with end-of-life issues. He himself knows firsthand what it's like to be faced with illness, pain, and even near-death experiences. Dr. Abshire's own harrowing life experiences have really inspired him to write this book. Both his parents were hospice patients, so he experienced firsthand the tragedy of loss. In 2004, a propane explosion set his arms, face, and head on fire, and even knocked out a disc in his neck, causing excruciating and debilitating pain. Then in 2010, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and underwent chemotherapy, where he's now currently in remission and doing well. In Live, Love, and Let Go, Dr. Abshire addresses hospice care, pain, suffering, and fear of death, while sharing his own personal experiences and insight. The book is a proactive approach to end-of-life issues, and the underlying theme prevalent in the book is attitude, focus, and perspective. Keeping a positive attitude, focusing on your faith, and viewing problems with a more positive perspective, all of which will help tremendously with how you deal with all of life's issues. Dr. Abshire's book is faith-based because it's essential to have some sort of higher belief system, he says. It's certainly challenging to make sense of anything, and he steadfastly believes you have to use your faith to survive tough times. Dr. Abshire was endorsed by a Catholic bishop, an evangelical Christian minister, and a rabbi. He's also a keynote speaker at hospice groups. And here's something even more amazing. Dr. Abshire wrote this book solely to help others, and all the royalties for the book go to his charity. To share his remarkable journey and more about his book, Live, Love, and Let Go, Dr. James Abshire joins me right here in the CUTV News studio for an exclusive interview. Dr. Abshire, it's a true honor and pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for joining us on CUTV News.
Thanks for having me here today, Jim.
I tell you, I'm so amazed by your remarkable story and what you've been through in your life. I mean, it's so inspirational. Tell us about the book in terms of when was that trigger moment for you when you decided to think about all these incredible things that have happened in your life, the good, the bad, the ugly, and sort of document it in a way that connects with other people, that's relatable to other people, and inspires other people who are going through things in their life as well.
Right. Well, there was a point in my life where I decided that I needed to have something else, some higher purpose that I really need to be doing in life. And that actually, I was in a propane fire. And what happened with that was a propane grill. And it was an old-fashioned grill, and they could top it off with propane, which is what they did at the filling station. Anybody who's watching the new propane tanks won't let you do this, but the old propane tanks, they could overfill it. And so basically when that happened, it turned into a flamethrower when I was trying to light the grill. And at the time I was kind of squatting down next to it. If you've ever seen any of those World War II movies, where the guy's there with the flamethrower, basically that's what the propane fire was like. Basically it engulfed me in flames. Now, keep in mind when I was going through medical school, I was saying to myself, of all of the different places in the hospital that I might potentially wind up, the burn ward is the place that I would least likely want to be. And all of a sudden, there I am in a fire, and I'm like, oh no, this is not good. Well, at that point in my life, I was really kind of fighting some depression my whole life. And so I'm there in the fire, and I'm like, I really don't know if I want to survive this to wind up on a burn ward.
Do you have the will,
right? And you hear about people being in a zone or something.
Yeah.
I was in some sort of a zone where I was actually contemplating, well, I can just take a big deep breath, and that would end it. And then and I'm like, well, I think my family would do okay. I've got a life insurance policy and that, and I think they would do okay without me. And then I'm thinking, well, if I take a big deep breath at that point, is that suicide? If I don't save myself from, an accident, is that suicide or not suicide? And I'm like, well, I don't really know the answer to that question. Came around, I was contemplating all of this, and it seemed like a long time. It must have just been fractions of a second, and all of this was going through my mind. And I'm like, well, I better do something quick because there's this fire all around me. And I said, well, what if God wants me to be doing something with my life that I haven't been doing yet? And I don't know the answer to that question. And there's only one way to really find out. And that was to get out of the fire, which I did, and my head was on fire. It burned all the skin off of my arms, my knees, my hands, took all the skin off my face, actually set my head on fire. In the process of rolling around on the ground, trying to put the fire out, I managed to knock a disc out in my neck. And so that subsequently got me a bone graft and plate and screws put in my neck, which actually that did two things for me. First, I got x-ray film so I could actually prove to your listeners that I've got my head screwed on right. And second, I had some experience with dealing with extreme pain. Which gave me really insight for the book. And then later on, I'm like, well, what is this thing that I really need to be, that I feel God wants me to be doing? Well, in my practice with internal medicine, I would see patients struggle every day with life and death issues in ways that I couldn't adequately address in the short time span of an office visit.
How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis as a physician, as a doctor, and not take it in and absorb it and let it, eat you up when you have people who are going through such traumatic experiences?
Yeah, that can be very tough to do. You have to be empathetic, but be able to step back and kind of look at the big picture at the same time. And so that's what I was doing, and in the process of that empathy, I would see, again, patients struggling, and I'm like, I'm not doing enough for them. I need to have something to really try to guide them through the whole process, the gamut of all of the issues, physical, emotional, mental, decisional issues that people might be going through in these tough times. And I tried to find the easy way out of it. I tried to find somebody else's book that I could just refer somebody to.
Sure.
And I wasn't able to find one that said everything that I really wanted it to say. So,
what was your life like before that propane explosion happened to you?
Right. Well, I was an internal medicine physician, with a busy medical practice, and seeing patients from all walks of life. I've got about 2,000 patients, and in the last 25 years, I've probably had well over 100,000 patient visits. People from ages 18 up to 106 or thereabouts, and male, female, and poor, rich, the whole gamut, various nationalities and cultures.
All over,
kind of the whole broad spectrum of everything, yeah.
And you also come from an engineering background, too, not just this incredible expertise you have in medicine, But prior to that, an engineering background. Tell us about that.
Right. So going through school the first time at Purdue University, I was actually I was working on getting a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and I'm like, in chemistry, I feel like I need to get a PhD to really get the job I want. But if I become a chemical engineer, I can get that job in 4 years of school. So that's the track I went to get bachelor's degrees in 4 years, and I was putting myself through school at the same time. So I've done flipping hamburgers, tossing pizzas,
selling vacuum cleaners too. I heard
selling Electrolux vacuum cleaners door to door, and tossing pizzas. Which I was actually pretty good at, spinning a pizza on my finger at one point in time, yeah.
So you've really, I mean, it is like an American success story to start from, the very beginnings, grassroots, and to actually put yourself through school and work your way up. And like I said with the introduction, perseverance, resilience, strength is really a good deal of what you're all about. And because of going through all of these horrific things, whether it's the propane explosion or the loss of the parents as they were in hospice, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as well, while you were writing this book too, you've had a lot of different things thrown at you where, like you said, during the time of the propane explosion, you could have easily said, how much can one person take? Where do you think this inner strength comes from within? A strength that you had in the beginning when you put yourself through school and you were selling vacuum cleaners, flipping pizza, doing whatever you needed to do to get where you needed and wanted to be, to also be able to deal with what could be considered horrific events for anybody to have to deal with, any one of those, but a series of those. Where do you think that inner strength for you as a doctor, as a human, comes from?
Ultimately, it all boils down to my faith in God. And that's really what got me through the fire and everything. At the time I was going through all of those things, there was a time in my life where I was having to collect cans so that I can eat dinner that night. A time where we went and had to buy unmarked cans at the grocery store because those are the cheap ones, and trying to figure out which ones did not have dog food in them, because we came home some nights with looking to eat dog food, and looking back at all these times, which at the time I didn't appreciate it, but now here today I'm actually grateful for those experiences, because it again helps me to put myself into the patient's shoes when they're going through tough times as well. And so I think in retrospect, I think it was all for a purpose.
Well, that's what it is, and that's what I know in the book you talk about this, that it is really the purpose. It's your mission, it's your calling, not just having been an engineer and a physician, or well-respected physician, but you could have easily, maybe retired and been on a golf course or gardening or boating on a lake somewhere or traveling the world, but you have this deep inner desire to connect with people, to make their lives better, to help them through with your book, but really with everything else that you do in your life. This is a real continuing passion for you, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I think, as I talk in the book too, it's a matter of keeping a positive attitude. Because if you can't keep a positive attitude, it's really hard to get through these tough times. And finding a higher purpose to your life is part of keeping a positive attitude. So, yeah.
With that propane explosion, you talked about there was some points where you said, maybe, this is it for me. How did you survive that? What did you do to get beyond that? Of course, doctors came in and helped you with the process of healing and things of that nature, but you yourself had to really dig deep to be able to help that along, help the doctors along, because if you were giving up, as you know as a doctor, you can do only so much, but if the person is mentally giving up, spiritually giving up, it's going to be hard to try to get them to physically recover. So for you, how did you sort of tap into yourself to get past that?
Well, part of it is not just all about me. And so I relied on my support system. So I had a great family. My sister, who's an RN, was actually visiting at the time, so she was able to help with the wound and dressing changes. My wife is terrific, and she really takes care of everything for me. The kids help keep a smile on my face, and it was interesting. 3 of the kids, they all saw me with my head on fire, and they all had different reactions to it. My one son was worried because it was close to the fire actually melted our window frame and nearly set our house on fire, and so he was worried about we're all going to be homeless and lose our home. My daughter was worried about losing her dad in the fire.
Sure.
And then my youngest son, who I think is going to be an entrepreneur, had the idea if he was going to sell tickets to the neighborhood kids so that they can come over and see the burnt man.
You're talking about 3 polar opposites.
Finding the humor in the situation can really help lift you up. Again, I realized that really all of our earthly problems are finite.
Yes.
So it is very helpful to know that there is an end to the problem. Mm-hmm. When I was going through a medical school to try to help the young surgeons out, there was a saying that all bleeding stops eventually, which doesn't give you a whole lot of confidence if you're the surgeon's patient, but at least for the young surgeons, they know that, okay, this problem's going to end at some point. And so knowing what I knew about being in a fire and neck surgery and all of that, I knew that there was going to be an end to the process. So having that perspective was really a big part of it. And again, relying on my faith. Okay, if God helped me survive this thing, I was in a time warp, and and when I was in that fire, it seemed like I could have been in that fire for 15, 20 minutes, all the thoughts that were going through my head. And I'm like, how did I survive this? I'm thinking God helped me get out, and so God wants me to do something. If God wants you to do something, you better do it.
Was your life passing by your eyes? And how they always say that all of a sudden your entire life is going past your eyes when you're near a death situation.
It was kind of like a time warp.
It really is.
I don't know if any of your listeners, there was a movie about Howard Hughes, where he had crashed an airplane, and there was like a very weird time warp scene where he was getting out of the fire and running out of there or something, and it was kind of a long, slow process that looked like it was all Hollywood, playing with cameras type stuff. That's how it felt. It was a weird time warp situation.
Did you feel like you were stuck in time? Like everything stopped?
I would say that, yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So the person you are today versus the person you were leading up to that, how would you describe who you are now as a result of that?
Again, looking back, I like myself much better. Again, I've got a purpose to my life. And researching through all of everything I did through the book, I've come through a thought process of really keeping a positive attitude and looking at things in the right perspective, and it really helps pull me through and makes me stronger. And I just see opportunities all day long. The other day we were on a flight, and they announced that the flight was going to be delayed because they found that there was some piece on the plane that was missing. Well, the other people that were there waiting for the plane were all upset. Mm. I was happy because they managed to figure out that they needed another piece on the plane before they took off and got into the air.
They got in early.
And so it's a matter. So I'm sitting there with a smile on my face, and everybody else is grumbling, and I'm like, okay, it's much better having this attitude and perspective.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, you said 2 key words that you talk about often in the book, which is the main thrust of everything: attitude, focus, and perspective. Tell us about those 3 words and why they're so important and how you work them into the book and into everything that you do.
Right. I actually give people, when I see them, a little wristband saying attitude, focus, and perspective. What I find is that if you've got a problem, any problem, whether it's a life and death problem or just an every day-to-day problem, if you re-emphasize on one of these 3 things, keeping a positive attitude, focusing on your faith, or looking at things with a little different perspective, will help with how you deal with it. So kind of for instance, had a patient come in to see me one day. First thing in the morning, he was all worked up and in a tizzy, and I'm like, well, what's the matter, sir? And he's like, well, I'm just having an awful day. It's a bad day. And I'm like, well, tell me, what's the matter? And he goes, well, you know, while he was coming here, some goofball ran him off the road on the freeway. And he's just having an awful day, and I'm like, well, let's reemphasize right. Attitude, focus, and perspective. So let's pick one of those, sir. So actually, attitude. So actually, you're not having a bad day. You're actually having a good day. Actually, I think you're having a great day because a little mini miracle happened to you out there on the freeway. And maybe there wasn't a parting of the waters, but there was a parting of the cars enough that you avoided an accident. And now you're here seeing me, and it doesn't get much better than that. When I was developing this process, I do find that this not only works for me, it works for other people around me. As a gentleman came in to see me one day. And normally he's very lively and jovial and big smile on his face. And one day he comes in and he's all sad and anxious and worked up. And I'm like, well, what's the matter? And he's like, well, he just found out that his daughter was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And he just doesn't know how to deal with the situation. So at the time, I was kind of developing this process, and so I said, well, let's give this a try. So I told him about the attitude, focus, and perspective. Well, okay, I gave him a prescription for a little bit of Xanax too, just to be on the safe side.
That helps.
So he comes off. He goes off. A few weeks later, he comes back in to see me, and he's back to his old self. And I'm like, well, wow, this is great. Your daughter must be doing better. And he said, well, actually, she's doing worse. But he really took what I said to heart, and he hardly actually took any of the Xanax, but the attitude, focus, and perspective has really made a difference for him, and he's just looking at things different and made some plans and everything, and things were much better. And so I do encourage people to give it a try.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The title of the book, Live, Love, and Let Go, A Doctor's Insightful Approach to Living and Dying. How did you come up with the title? I'm sure when you were thinking about the title, there was other titles that maybe ran through the course of your mind, but how did you eventually decide on this title? I think it's perfect.
I've got a clever wife.
And so, that's always a plus.
That's always a plus. She knew my thought processes, and she put it down in the words. So it's all about making the most you can of life. But when things aren't going to go quite the way you really want it, just accept things as they are. And with the insightful approach, you know, being able to write it both from the doctor's perspective as well as my own experience as a patient, so really writing it from both sides of the white coat, if you will, has really, I think, helped me to make it a better book.
So for folks watching right now who are saying, well, what would the doctor's perspective be other than maybe prescribing medicines and telling people to eat right and relax and calm? What is that a little, maybe you can give us a couple of little nuggets of that doctor's insight, since you're the doctor and it's unique to you?
Right. Well, first off, I've, you know, not just being a physician, where again, I've seen people from all walks of life with all sorts of problems, dealing with pain, emotional suffering, decision problems, everything they could possibly think about. I also saw both my parents being hospice patients. I was executor to my father's will, so I do know how a will should not be done. So I know about that.
Right.
And then my experience both in the propane fire And then actually 2 years into working on the book, feeling fine, everything was good. I'm thinking to myself, now how am I going to write this book so that somebody who's going through a life and death situation can't come to me and say, well, doctor, that's easy for you to say, but you aren't walking in my shoes.
Right.
So there I was feeling fine. So I actually, believe it or not, prayed to God to help me out with that problem. The following week, I go in for a screening colonoscopy.
Typical routine.
And just a routine colonoscopy, thinking everything's fine. And eventually, after a couple more scopes and multiple biopsies, I was diagnosed with a form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And
Shock to the system.
which is yeah. So I've actually had somebody look me in the face and say, "You have terminal cancer." And so fortunately, it's a slow growing and very treatable. So I did have in my mind, the advantage of being able to go through everything that the patient goes through. So IVs, biopsies, scans, some chemotherapy, kind of dealing with all of that.
Good thing you were proactive with the colonoscopy, which is why everybody should get those colonoscopies.
Everybody, yeah.
It's so important. You hear so much about it because they can discover a lot of different things.
Discover what you don't know.
And you've always been proactive about your health?
Yeah, I'm going to say not. I'm getting more and more that way. Yeah.
Is the doctor
so
following his own orders?
To listen to the doctor's orders more. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because you're so busy taking care of everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you are in remission. Things are good for you now.
Correct. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So I'm doing great. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Do you feel almost like a cat, like you have 9 lives, like things can be thrown at you and there's an angel on your side, there's just something about your spirit?
I haven't, being a dog person, I haven't ever thought of it that way before, but I think you're onto something. I do feel like I've really been blessed, and I've gone through some things in life, but and looking back on it, I wouldn't trade it. I'm glad I went through those things.
Wouldn't change a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really amazing. And the book, again, what I like about it too is you break it down into different chapters and different sections. Tell us about the process of writing this book. What was that like for you? Was it easy? Was it something that you wanted to do for a long time and then you got to that computer and started going? Or did it really take a while to get going and then be able to assemble your thoughts and have the book be something viable?
Yeah. No, I'm a slow writer. In fact, going through school, I was basically good at everything except for English writing and public speaking. And so
here you are now.
Here I am, and I've learned
the book, and he's speaking in public.
Yeah.
See?
I've learned never to say never.
That's right.
And I am a slow writer, and it took a couple years, but I wanted to try and get it right, and I wanted to cover really kind of the whole gamut of everything: fear, hope, pain, suffering, code status, end-of-life decisions, hospice, emotional sufferings, and so I've got humor, heaven, kind of the whole gamut of everything, and so each chapter is kind of standalone, and so people can go to that and try to make the most of it, and try to also formulate a game plan for both the patient as well as the family and caregiver's perspective. So really try to help, in our society, we really don't deal with the process of death. So when you think of life, we've got various phases of life. We've got childbirth and kids in school and work life and retirement life, and people talk about all the different things that they go through at those points of time. But when it comes to death, it's kind of like, oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. let's try to change the subject and
move
go
on.
on to something else
Yeah.
as quick as we can.
Absolutely.
And I think we as a society don't do well with that. And I've not had much experience with overseas, but I've heard that other people overseas say, yeah, you Americans are just not very good at it. You're good at a lot of things, but not very good at dealing with these issues.
And is that one of probably several reasons why you have a chapter where you discuss conquering fear?
Yeah, right. And so that's a big part of it. So people fear death. So you don't want to talk about what you're afraid of as kind of the ostrich in the sand. Okay, out of sight, out of mind, and let's not talk about that because they don't know how to deal with that. And so I do, I think early on in the book, want to talk about trying to help people overcome that fear of death, because that's really key to trying to open up any discussion.
Conquering fear. Near-death experiences, too, is another area?
I think near-death experiences are key. They're actually surprisingly common. On the order of magnitude of about 1 in 200 people. You know, with modern medicine, people get CPR and brought back to life and go through various experiences.
You have pneumonia in the hospital and bounce back, a virus.
Right, and they tend not to talk about it,
right,
because they're kind of strange experiences and they don't want other people thinking they're crazy or anything. But the people that I've talked with and that have gone through near-death experiences, they've lost their fear of death. They see the white light or whatever they happen to see on the other side, and they realize, okay, that was a comforting, quieting,
the next
anxiety-killing situation, and they've lost their fear of death, and which is, like, to me, is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
But it really kind of speaks, and to me, kind of can be used to help lift other people.
So then that would lead us to where you discuss the immortality of your soul, right? Tell us about that.
Well, it's all about looking at things with proper perspective. And so when you're talking about perspective, there's all different ways that you can look at things. Two ways that I think people tend not to really think about is the past and the future. And in my mind, which is a faith-based mind, your soul is immortal. Which St. Augustine in that chapter I bring up argues much more eloquently than myself. But so if your soul is immortal, that gives you a different perspective, because when you think about it that way, whatever pain, suffering, problem that you may be having right now, in the big scheme of things, in the internal scheme of things, is really a very small point in time. So if you think about it, any problem, no matter what it is at this point, no matter how big it seems, 50, 100 years from now, when you're off in heaven with your loved ones, for the rest of eternity, is not going to be any big deal in the ultimate analysis. And that really helps to, again, quiet down any kind of anxiety and fears that we may bring at points in mind.
You talk about dealing with physical pain as well.
Right. Physical pain and emotional suffering. And again, with that proper perspective and the proper attitude, can really help to alleviate that pain. So when I talk in the pain chapter, you know, there's pills, of course, but I really try to sort of put that on the back burner. So those are available to help take the edge off.
Right. Yeah.
But with the proper attitude, as well as some additional things, so there's medical equipment and things like massage therapy and different things that can help. But with the proper perspective, can really help. My daughter right now is actually in grad school to be a chronic pain psychologist. Wow. So she is spending 5 years of studying to become a chronic pain psychologist. But again, if you take that proper attitude, it can really help to bring that pain level down. If you've got a purpose to your life, again, it will help bring that pain level down. And then 3 tools, which I do bring up, is humor, gratitude, and forgiveness. And those things are huge.
Oh, sure.
And I think everybody knows that those are good things. But they've done lots of medical studies on these things showing physiologic benefits. So physiologic, how it can help your body. And that's
releasing
huge.
Endorphins and dopamine. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for instance, with humor, I don't know if you remember Dr. Norman Cousins.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Was a writer, psychologist, and he had chronic pain. What he found is that 10 minutes of laughter would give him 2 hours of being pain-free.
Absolutely.
So it releases your body's endorphins.
Which stick around for a while, right?
Stick around for a while and help you. They've done studies on humor that it increases the blood flow in your carotid arteries. So watching a half-hour comedy will increase the blood flow to your brain for 24 hours later, which is amazing. So we're talking about decreasing your stroke risk with using humor. They've seen that humor helps to lift your levels of hope and make you an optimist, so you have a can-do attitude rather than oh, poor me attitude. So that is really key.
Gratitude as well, as you mentioned.
Gratitude is huge. Again,
your blessings.
Right. Again, it helps you to look as a optimist. Dr. Robert Emmons at the University of California, Davis, who was actually one of my son's professors, did lots of studies and a proponent of gratitude and gratitude journals and the benefits of gratitude, again, on how it can help bring pain levels down. It can improve your heart functioning. It actually can help sharpen your mind. And make you an optimist rather than a pessimist. When people who are optimists, they've done studies on optimists, they can actually live up to 7 years longer if you're an optimist rather than a pessimist. So, your stress hormone levels are much improved if you're an optimist rather than a pessimist. So your body's ability to fight immunity and events and effects on your vasculature is improved if you're an optimist. And so I do encourage people to really seek gratitude, which to me, again, is a big part of keeping a positive attitude.
How do you handle heavy rush hour traffic when somebody cuts you off on the highway? First with humor.
Attitude. First with humor, and I'm human.
Perspective.
So the initial thing is okay, do I want to shake my fist at him? But then I sit back and say, well, at least it's not an accident. And,
right. There's positive in there somewhere.
Whatever I was going and doing in the big picture of things is not that big of a deal, and so just sit back and relax and take what comes.
Take what comes, which is really a good deal of what life is about, because it can come at you. Huge. And you can't always plan it out and script it and orchestrate it. It's not a movie, it's not a TV show. Things will happen that you can't control. Don't try to control everything.
You can't change what happens to you.
Right.
You can change your reaction to what happens to you.
Right.
And this is what this is all about, using a little medical and practical knowledge and keeping that positive attitude, using humor, forgiveness, and looking at things a little different perspective, and that will change how you react to whatever that injury that you might have, or injury or insult might be, and you'll look at things with a much happier life. Yeah.
I'm starting to, actually in reading the book, which I've done from cover to cover twice already, I'm starting to really understand that I believe you are, through all of these experiences you've had, tremendous success, loving family, wonderful experiences, and also some tragic and horrific things as well, beyond sometimes what some people deal with in their lives, that you've been placed here for a particular purpose, and that you're sort of a conduit for something larger. You're being used. These gifts are coming through you, and there's something larger that's using you as the method of communication and of healing. Do you see that for yourself?
I do. I see myself as basically a tool in the big picture of things, and God can do with me whatever He wants to do with me. He helped get me out of that fire, and so I'll do whatever I need to do at this point to try to make the most of things.
What would you say to somebody watching right now who is going through some pretty horrific things, whether it's loss of a loved one or dealing with a relative with Alzheimer's, or they are bedridden because of a disability, an accident, and they are at the edge, and there is that thought that you had when you were in that explosion of, maybe there's no more reason for me to be here, people wouldn't miss me, I think it's time for me to go. What would you say to somebody that is thinking that way right now and watching this? That
is a very tough one. And again, I always go back to relying on attitude, focus, and perspective, and trying to use those tools, the humor and the gratitude and forgiveness. Sometimes people are in such deep, dark places that it's hard for them to try and think of anything positive. I've had patients where I talk to them about, the gratitude that there must be something they're grateful for, whether it's a nice pair of clothes, a glass of water, whatever, and they're in such a dark, deep place that they, just start drawing a blank when you ask them about it. And so some of those people, I do think there's certainly a role for things like antidepressant medicines, and certainly counseling and that sort of thing are certainly huge for people that are really in that.
So reach out, ask for help. Like you said, through these events that you've had in your life, you've had a support system. You have physicians that that have helped as well, the medical community, but also your family, your friends. You've had people surrounding, lifting you up. Don't try to do this alone, right?
Don't try to do it on your own. And if you're out there feeling great right now, start working on building your support system so that they're
just
there
like
for you when it's like investing in life, and you're helping others, and it gives you a purpose. And at some point, you may need their help, and be grateful for that.
Incredible. I mean, we were talking about overcoming suffering is another area. Evangelism, a chance for empowerment, starting treatment. Memory, the chapter I nearly forgot.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one. Happens to the best of us.
Happens to the best of us, and you can forget things, which is why I encourage people to look for reminders. So that is why I actually wear one of these myself, and actually my wife had one that was engraved for me with her handwriting on that.
These are terrific. I'm wearing one too.
With the attitude, focus, and perspective.
They're really cool.
And you really need to constantly, really constantly remind yourself about how things are really not so bad. And trying to put things in a little different perspective, again, taking that time element into account, and really using it for the positive.
Talk about suicide, alcohol, recreational drugs, hospice, a way of caring, a patient's approach as well, a family, friend, caregiver's approach. I mean, this is very well thought out. It's laid out beautifully. You're also receiving a lot of incredible feedback. I mean, just doing my research for this interview, and we've also done radio interviews with you at CUTV News as well, and just really learning about your incredible life. Can you share with us maybe some testimonials and some feedback you've had from people who have really been impacted by this amazing book.
Yeah, no, I've really been blessed with lots of great comments.
How's it make you feel?
And grateful.
Yeah.
Take it to the full and help lift you. You know, I use things like this in times where I still have tough times in my life.
Yeah.
And so I think back at positive things like this to help me lift me out of that blue mood or funk that I might get at times. And so some wonderful comments. Here's a comment from actually a nurse that said, if I'd had this book 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been depressed all those years. This is a lady, Karen Johnson, who she saw her husband murdered. And so she wrote, as a Christian woman who witnessed the tragic murder of my husband, what I appreciated most about this book is its fresh approach to coping with death. I have a different outlook on my own mortality. I am truly blessed. And then
it's incredible.
Just one more that received here recently. A lady wrote me that I'm a hospice nurse. Recently, I lost a dear friend, lifelong friend, to a sudden catastrophic brain bleed. Her mother, who was on hospice, had died just days before. I found myself reeling in sorrow and anger and trying to make sense of it all. I questioned things in my own beliefs and wondered what it was like where my friend and mother were. Anyway, walking along the row of desks at work one day, I picked up and realized a book on the desk, and it belonged to one of our chaplains who had moved on to Hawaii, so she took the liberty of starting to read. She says, I could hardly put the book down. I started in the middle of the chapter about heaven. I have gone back and reread it several times. I can't hardly read it without crying because I think it is because it was so relieved to find such a treasure. I feel calmed, relieved, and reassured. A wonderful book, an awesome random find. I definitely have to get my own copy. Looking forward to reading your other books. Thank you so much for writing such a book. This was from a hospice nurse, and I just feel so blessed that I was able to help somebody out that way.
Somebody within the medical community that's been touched as well.
Right.
And I know there's hundreds more of those. I mean, even on the back of the book, there's lists of people, and they just come in every day. It's really a unique book, and it's that combination of, which is rare, of being able to express yourself as the experienced medical professional, the physician, the doctor, and as a patient, and as a human. I mean,
right.
All of those perspectives are referenced in this book and in everything else you're doing, which I think is, I mean, it's the entire gamut that is touched here. Right.
And I think if people use these things, no matter what stage or walk of life they might be in, helps.
Absolutely.
So I often forget about any diagnosis that I have of non-Hodgkin's, but just going through day-to-day life, I try to look at these things and putting things in proper perspective and focusing on my faith, which is huge, and which also reminds me of using forgiveness when I feel like I'm wronged, and that's just huge, and changing how my perspective and how I feel about things going from day to day.
Forgive others and forgive yourself too, right? That's big.
Forgive yourself, which really, you know, most all of us have somebody to forgive, and oftentimes it's themselves.
That's right.
And C.S. Lewis, I think, put it best when he said, you know, if we have a forgiving God, and if God forgives us, then for us not to forgive ourselves is like putting ourselves up as a higher tribunal than God. So we're saying that our opinion is more important than God's opinion. So you really need to work on forgiving others, which to me is huge.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
The proceeds for this book, that come from this book, the sale of this book, are going to your charity. That is a beautiful thing. Tell us about the charity.
Right, so all royalties are basically going to a combination of church building, missionary work, and Cancer Society.
That's
so
a wonderful thing. I mean, you're touching, again, paying it forward and touching just so many lives in doing that, because those monies can help so, it's just hundreds and thousands. You're building a legacy here. What do you hope your legacy is, Doctor?
I'd like to change people's attitude. So that they are able to open up a conversation and dealing with that last phase, the most difficult phase of life. And I think that's really huge in terms of improving the quality of life of really all of us. It's an area, a big, huge phase of our lives that we just want to hide away from. And if we can embrace it and open up a conversation about it and not be so afraid and look towards the positive, then things will be just so much better.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
It's a beautiful story.
Yeah,
and it's a
you.
life well lived, and you're sharing it with so many others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
What do you hope people get from the book itself?
Basically, keeping a positive attitude and hopefully feeling blessed and opening up their perspective on things, like that nurse I just mentioned, and changing. So she went from a sad blue period to, okay, they're in a better place, and we've got positive things to be looking forward to here.
You also have a website where people can connect with you as well, right? To
Correct.
learn more about you and the book and everything that you're working on, because you're constantly working on new and exciting things. What's the website?
Live, Love, and Let Go.
.com?
Correct.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
I tell you, it's an amazing book, folks. Live, Love, and Let Go. Dr. James, this is unbelievable. I tell you, I've read this from cover to cover.
Thank you.
Twice. I think I'm going to read it a third time. It's just really
that's
amazing.
the memory part, because if you keep reminding yourself,
that's what it is.
It does help, because we're human. We tend to forget things. So,
you know what it is? And each time that I've read it, I've picked up different things from a different perspective that maybe I didn't pick up the first time, because I focused on this particular section maybe a little bit more. Maybe something happened that day or that week, and now I'm going to that section. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's what that's about, putting it all together. So this is a wonderful reference book that I think you will keep going back to and referring to again and again, the reader.
That's certainly what I hope from people, and I've certainly had people tell me they've read it multiple times, so I really feel blessed.
Doctor, thank you so much for coming here at CUTV News and sharing all of this this wealth of inspiration, empowerment. Again, truly, resilience, perseverance, strength, love, caring, empathy. You're a reflection of that.
Thanks so much for having me here.
It's an honor to have you here, and continued success in everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What an extraordinary life and an extraordinary man. Dr. James Abshire, a true inspiration to us all, paying it forward and making our world a better place. Dr. Abshire's book, Live, Love, and Let Go, a doctor's insightful approach to living and dying, is available at Amazon.com. I'm Jim Masters, CUTV News. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.